This morning's scripture comes from the book of John, chapter 1, verses 43 through 51. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God descending and ascending upon the Son of Man." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.
At Emory St. Joe's Hospital, there are 2 nuns left, only 2. When St. Joe's was downtown Atlanta and had nothing to do with Emory, there was a host of nuns down there that took care of things, and they would hurt you if you didn't do things right. There's 2 left, and they will hurt you if you get in their way very much. One of the highest privileges of my ministry was when I would go to St. Joseph's on Sunday afternoon because it was so close to the church I was serving. I would go oftentimes after church on Sunday afternoon and be in a collar. And invariably somebody would stop me and say, "Good morning, sister." And I think, I got 11 grandchildren, wonder how that came to be. But I'd just nod and tell them, "Good morning." Our world is changing, and that's for sure. But there was one nun that was there. Her name was Stella. And there's a huge portrait of her, almost as big as this pulpit. And it's hanging in a hall, and I often would stop by there just to look at it and think, gracious, how can anybody be that good all the time? Right at the bottom of that portrait on the frame is a little brass plaque, little, not big, and it says, "I thank God daily for the gift of my calling." And I begin to include that in my morning prayers when I wake up in the morning and I begin to get things ready, and Atticus and I begin to walk. One of the first things I do is thank God for the gift of my calling. This text is about the calling of a few disciples, Andrew and Simon. We know him better as Peter. Had already been called, and now Jesus is calling Philip and Nathanael. For me, this calling is vague. Follow me. And I want to say, to where? For what? Come and see. And what's that going to cost me when I come and see? vague in the calling. When I think of my own call to ministry, it makes absolutely no sense. And so I went to a pastor and I said, I know I'm being called to traditional ministry, but it makes no sense. And he handed me his Bible laying on his desk, and he said, well, find a call in there that does. So that might be a good thing for you to do on this cold Sunday afternoon. Just go home, pull this book out, blow the dust off of it, and see if you can find a call in that Bible that makes any sense. Now, I knew when I was about 8 years old, but people sort of laughed and giggled and patted me on the head because everybody knew a girl couldn't be a preacher. But I knew, and I don't know how I could have articulated it at that age, but I knew. I've told you before, all my friends, when their pets would die, would come and find me, and will you do this funeral? And it'll be at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I've been doing funerals since I was 8 years old. And every time one of my friends got a goldfish and brought it home, I thought, another funeral. And I've told you before, and recently I've told you, that my uncles were farmers, and so when we would go to my Uncle Levy's house, I would find my favorite fence post and step up on a rock on the outside of the pasture and lay my Bible or book or whatever I had in my hand on that fence post, and I would preach to the cows, and I would make motions to the cows, and I'd preach to the cows. Every once in a while when I look out, I thought, good Lord, after all this time, I'm still preaching to cows. They're still out there going into another world. You can just see the glazed over looks in their eyes. So when they said to me, we need to make some decisions about your career. You're in now life decisions about career. Where do you want to go to school? What do you want to do? What do you want to be? And let me tell you, what you do and what you be is two different things. You with me? I said, I want to be a preacher. You can't be a preacher. You can be a missionary. I don't want to be a missionary. I mean, they go to weird places and eat weird food. And if I do go on mission trips, which I will say are good for my soul, I leave home with clean sheets on the bed, a candle on the bathtub, the fluffiest towels I got, ready to take a bubble bath when I get back and be clean and neat, clean out my fingernails. Because when I go on a mission trip, insect spray is my cologne, sunscreen is my makeup, and my shampoo gets rid of things that are living. Ready to be home. No, I don't want to be a missionary. No, thank you. Not called to it. Have no desire to be a missionary. Well, you can marry a preacher. Lord, that's worse than being a missionary. I don't want to be a preacher's wife. So I went into nursing. It was a service field, and I believe also a calling. I worked in the operating room where I didn't have to listen to people whine, so you could get it done and get out of there and move on to the next case. And at the end of the day, my goodness, at the gallbladders you had removed, and people were better than they were when they started out that morning, and I liked it. It was good to me, and I liked it. But God is so often a hound of heaven that will keep nipping at your heels and stay right behind you until you answer his call. And so eventually the time came that I took off my mask and I laid down my knife and I said, going to do something else, going to school. Our salary was cut in half, made no sense. But I knew I couldn't put it off anymore, and I was glad to be done with putting it off. I believe every one of us have a calling. Each and every one of us, there is no one exempt from having a calling. It might not be to traditional clergy ministry, but the calling is there, no matter what it is. Sometimes I believe people are called to teach. I actually think that's a higher calling than preaching. Doctors, lawyers, yes, even lawyers, called. Civil servants, first responders, firefighters, police persons, military, all callings. Right, Christian? Yes, ma'am. I like him. I like Christian. And first we have to decide if we're going to answer these calls or not, and then we have to decide if they are a curse or a blessing. Are they a curse or a blessing? Yes. Yes, they are. Nathaniel and Philip, and even Andrew and Peter, really had no idea what they were getting into. Vague. Come and see. Follow me. But they fell in love with Christ, and when they fell in love with Christ, there was a gnawing at them to follow him no matter what. We know that feeling, whether we will admit it or not, whether we will acknowledge it or not, whether we will accept it or not, or whether we ignore it or not. We know that feeling because we are all called. In a few weeks, we are calling back some of the young people, and some of them are not so young anymore, that went into ministry from this congregation or who began their ministry in this congregation. We've already sent the letters of invitation. It will be on a Wednesday night, I believe, February the 7th. And we've invited them, as many as we could think of, and we polled the staff, and somebody would come in a few days later and say, I thought of another one. And so we've called back as many as we can think of. I've asked them to sit a panel on this Wednesday night after supper. I hope you'll pencil in the date so they can say to you, here's where I am now, here's what I'm doing now, and here's how Lawrenceville influenced me and helped me along my way. We've heard from a few. Andrew Irwin. We've invited Andrew Chappell. We hope he'll be here, but don't know that yet. Jeff Rogers will be back. Alan Hoskin, who didn't ever go too far away, but he's kind of John the Baptist, and so we need him to give us a report every once in a while. I love Alan. Mike Long will be here that night. I've put a call in to Davis and simply said, a lot of you boys are coming home. Just to give a report, wish you could drive down here. If it's not too impossible for you to do, please come. You'll want to see your boys. They're coming home. You should be very proud. This church is noted for the young people that went into ministry because of people like you. Thank you for nurturing them, for pushing them, for your expectations of them. Thank you. It'll be fun to hear from them. We've asked David Walters to be part of that group, even though he didn't come out of this church. His wife did, and she's the spouse of a preacher, and I think that's harder than being a preacher. But I want to be very clear with you that everyone has a call. It may not be to clergy. It may not be to traditional ministry. Lord knows Alan Hoskin does a not traditional ministry, but he does a great ministry. It might be to other things. I think Patrick has a call to work with special needs people. I think it's obvious to those of us here. I think that Chad, I don't know where Chad is this morning, but I think Chad, he's at the men's retreat, has a call to golf cart ministry. It's cold out there, and he's buzzing around picking people up and bringing them to the door. I think he does a great job with that. I think there are Stephen ministries that go on here because people answered their call to that. Sunday school teachers, coaches, and not just for children and young people that need to be coached in sports, but coaches in life for young people that are in this church. There are those who are called to develop programs. Deeb, I want to thank you for what you do at the Lawrenceville Elementary School and a reading program that's going on there, because you were called to that and you answered that call. And if anybody else feels called to that, see Deeb after church. She'll put you to work. Ryan and Jen and Kim and Catherine all called to work with students and children, but they cannot do it alone, and some of you are being called to help with that. Some of you are called to help with hospitality, to be ushers and greeters, and that training is coming up. But let me tell you, greeters, you're the first person that somebody sees when they walk into this church if they've never been here before, and you decide whether they're going to come back or whether they're not, by the way you act toward them and the way you greet them and about in your hospitality. That is a calling. I never thought that we would have to have security training, but that too is a calling. And we've identified some people in the church, and some people have volunteered, and they'll be going through training, and that definitely is a calling, because no greater love than any person can have but to lay down their life for another. Thank you for answering that call. And then there's receptions that have to be done, and food ministries when you're taking a meal to somebody and serving a meal to them, or maybe even the summer feeding program. What a ministry that is. And it's a calling that makes you go there. And we still haven't touched music. I believe that Bill Steele and the choir under his direction can take you right to the throne of God. And when your eyes are glazed over when I'm preaching, you're hearing the words of "Be thou my vision." And then you'll take them home with you. A calling. There's a fire in people's belly and in people's bones to go forth and do passionately what they've been called to do. And if you've lost that fire, that's on you, because God didn't take it away. Some people are called to administration, and that too is a ministry. All kind of ministries. And the common denominator, I want you to hear this, the common denominator is not what we are called to, but to whom we are called. And that would be our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, being called is kind of scary. No matter what you're called to, sound ministries. You operate, go operate that sound one Sunday and let everybody jump on you. Because these can't hear, and these say it's too loud, and somebody's microphone whistled and you didn't get it right, and Go do it one Sunday. It's a calling. Scary. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Have you read it? Well, now, he called it a children's book, and so did the critics, but it's not a children's book. It's very profound. 4 children in London during World War II were farmed out to some distant relatives out in the country to keep them out of London, where it was feared that bombs might fall and their physical safety was jeopardized. And so they were in this strange house with a strange person they didn't know, and they got to wandering around, and they got to this bedroom that had a big wardrobe in it. Now, young people don't know what a wardrobe is. But if you're not young, you know what a wardrobe is. And they climbed in and began to play when they were playing hide and seek, and they touched the back of that wardrobe, and it just took them right into the land of Narnia. And that land had been frozen by an evil queen that had just stopped all progress of that country and froze it stiff. A beaver came up to them and stood on his hind legs and said to them, literally said to them, "Let's go to my house. We need to talk about this. We think you two are the sons of Adam and you two are the daughters of Eve, and we think you've come to have Aslan thaw out our land. Save us." Aslan was a great, majestic lion that was a messianic figure, was to Narnia what Jesus is to us. And he kept talking about Aslan and talking about Aslan, and finally Lucy, the youngest of the 4 children, said to him, "Well, I'd like to meet him. Can we meet him?" And Mr. Beaver said, "Yes, we can arrange that. We'll bring Aslan here. I think he'll come, and you can meet him." And she said, "Like up close?" "Yes, you can get as close as you like." And she said to Mr. Beaver, "Is he safe?" And Mr. Beaver said, "Who said anything about safe? No. He's not safe, but he's good." I think we can say that about our calling. Is it safe? No, it's not safe, but it's good. We're called and cannot deny our calling if we're honest with ourselves, and we will never be at peace if we're not willing to answer our call. Bishop Cannon used to say, if you can lay your head on, see if I get this right, Bill, if you can lay your head on the pillow at night and sleep and not be a Methodist preacher, then you're not called to be a Methodist preacher. Go do something else. I think he was right. We cannot answer our call to ministry unless we're able to deny ourselves. There's no way. We must follow Jesus to answer our call to ministry. We must. Words like discipleship and commitment and obedience and sacrifice come to mind. I struggled with that when I went into ministry. I had always made sacrifice. I had worked in a smaller Methodist church just on the outside of Covington, and I gave hours. I worked with the youth. I played piano. I worked with the choir. Nobody there knew how to read music, Bill, except me. So I bought it, picked it out, taught it to the choir director so she could teach it to the choir. And if I made a mistake, nobody even knew because nobody could read music but me. And I felt good about the sacrifice that I was making for Christ's sake and for Christ's church. And then I went into ministry, and good people like you began to pay me. Don't get any ideas. I need that money. Just saying. But then I was working on disciple Bible studies and all kind of wonderful things and was getting paid for it. And I struggled with where my sacrifice might be, because I believe we are all called to sacrifice. I believe we're called to put our hands to the plow and not look back. I believe we're called to letting the dead bury the dead, and that's only a saying. I don't mean we just walk away from that. I did 6 funerals in 7 days. I believe we should all be moving toward the goal of perfection in love, and looking toward helping the least and the lost, and telling the good news of Jesus Christ, the gospel, and proclaiming it not just inside these walls, but in the streets, in the post office, in the grocery store. I wear my name tag every day. My kids ask me every once in a while when I'm in Covington, do you take a shower in that thing? It starts conversations. I'm pumping gas. Yesterday in Toccoa, I'm pumping gas. And this man said, oh, you're a preacher? Yeah. At Lawrenceville First Methodist? Yeah. Why don't you come and worship with us? And he said, well, it's a pretty good drive. And I said, yeah, but you get good preaching and it's worth the drive. It starts conversations. I was able to say to him, there's a Methodist church right down the road. I just passed it. Why don't you try that one Sunday morning? You see? We need to be loving every one of God's children no matter what. Do you understand that? Every one of God's children no matter what. First thing, before anything else, when we answer our call, is we must be willing to walk with Jesus. Now, listen carefully. This is a quote, and it's profound, and so you're going to have to think about it. It is not obedience to an abstract set of codes or laws, but consent to a costly, joyful relationship, answering our call. So my question to you this morning is simple. Are you willing? Are you ready? It is the sweetest thing to hold Christ's hand, and sometimes the hardest, but always the best.